Okay, so thank you very much, everybody, for coming to, is it lecture 19? Not the numbers, but whatever lecture number it is, certainly the topic of prohibition is one that I think is fundamentally important. And in many ways, I think I could argue that it is the biggest mistake that we have ever made as a human species, is to prohibit drugs. And the consequences of this prohibition are huge. And the only other public policy, in essence, if you want to call it that, we could compare it to, I think, is slavery. But 100 years ago, we were wise enough to start, getting rid of those laws and discouraging it around the world. And ironically, we have, for the most part, completely condemned slavery internationally. It is something that the prohibition of drugs has in some ways replaced that policy and far worse. And so I thank everybody for coming here and for listening and paying attention online, because I don't think we could have a more critical issue to focus on. And there's so many different angles that this war on drugs can be discussed and thought about, that it often seems hard to sort of pin the tail on the donkey and make the change or changes happen faster. But as I said at the convention, the changes we hope to see towards legalization are huge and complex, and any step that we take collectively or individually towards those changes is really important. And so, I guess there's many different angles upon which to focus in terms of the social impact of prohibition. And it's something that, because we're here in Canada, and we often focus on the economic and health costs, but the costs go far beyond that. But we will start with some of those. I have a book here from 1991, author's Mark Thornton, an economist, that titles The Economics of Prohibition. And he highlights 10 things that a free market solution would have benefits from. And so I'm going to, on one hand, talk about the benefits of a legal drug structure, which is totally hypothetical. But in doing so, we will, through these 10 points, highlight the costs, or in some cases, the lost opportunities that the war on drugs has for us. And the first one in the book here is: a competitive price would ultimately free up resources for the consumption of goods such as food, clothing, shelter, and medical care. And so they're talking on a consumer level, that for the most part, prohibition has, in some cases like cannabis, inflated or increased the costs of the drugs. And if they were available in a competitive market system, we would have more money, essentially, certainly in the case of cannabis smokers, where we're often paying $180 or $200 an ounce at the very least, in a situation like BC, where if it was more based upon the cost of production, it would be substantially less than that. And so going with that, though, is also the lost opportunity, and we come back to that a bit later, but in revenue sources. According to the UN, and I don't have all current numbers for some of these things, it's kind of hard sometimes to do that. You can spend hours searching for stats online. But apparently in 2003, the UN thought that about $321 billion a year was being spent on illegal drugs. It's about 1% of world trade. I've heard other estimates suggest that illegal drugs and organized crime account for as much as 8% of world trade. Even if it's as little, if you want to call it that, as the 1%, $320 billion is a substantial amount of money that isn't being taxed or part of any kind of a regulatory scheme. The profit motivation would stimulate producers to introduce goods with characteristics that enhance customer satisfaction. Deadly products that survive in black markets would be eliminated. Producers would compete by improving their products to meet the desires of customers. The market for particular drugs such as alcohol, marijuana, or aspirin would be characterized by diversified products. And so that benefit from a legal system points to a number of problems with the current one. Certainly the unregulated drugs that are being sold allow for a vast number of different problems. And so we have healthcare costs associated with that, to be sure. We have people that become addicted to, or in some cases die, because they're using drugs that they're unaware of the purity of them, or in some cases they're even unaware they're doing it. There was a girl here at the University of Victoria died about 2 years ago. She was at a party, she took a drink out of a water bottle. It was very high in GHB, and she died from that event. And so
what kind of concentration do you need for that?
I don't know enough about GHB to say, but it's like pretty much drain cleaner. So like, my understanding is it's made with a bunch of cleaners quite often in a bathtub. It's really quite nasty stuff. But because it's unregulated and unmarked, like, if the bottle had GHB on it, she would have, if she wanted to, took a lower dose and otherwise. But when we're dealing with a completely unregulated market, you don't want to label things. There's a disincentive to do anything other than barely keep your customers alive so that they come back for more. And so, and in many cases, making stronger and stronger drugs has been the way to maintain your customers. And so the benefits of a legal structure in that way are quite a bit more, are quite substantial, I should say. Okay, so as with any dangerous product, suppliers would prefer regular customers who are familiar with the product, thereby reducing expenditures on marketing and their exposure to liability law. Suppliers would no longer enlist the services of minors to retail their products. And so this again covers some of the dangerous product issues that I talked about. So again, when it comes to liability laws in this day and age, if we had regulated drugs like LSD and mushrooms and the like, and people were able to go and choose what they wanted and pay appropriate market driven prices, then the liability issues would be significantly less, so regulating the products under a legal system would dramatically eliminate a lot of problems that exist, and we'll get back to sort of liability issues in a bit here, because under Prohibition, if there's a problem with the drugs, there's no way that there can be recourse other than violence, essentially. Now, the other point, though, he doesn't get to it much more in this list, is the effect on youth. Under Prohibition, there's a great incentive to get young people to sell drugs to other young people, and it almost just naturally occurs. I started selling hash at the age of 17, in part because I could just buy